Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're talking about international relations, the limits of a passport, and maybe a little bit of armchair travel as we explore 10 countries where Americans are flat out not allowed to visit. You'd think in our globalized world, a little thing like citizenship wouldn't entirely lock you out of a country. But there are always exceptions. Places where history, politics, or maybe just plain old stubbornness have created barriers higher than any visa application can reach. So buckle up, because we're about to take a whirlwind tour of some surprisingly off-limits locations, uncovering the stories behind their closed borders. Let's get started. First up, we've got the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, more commonly known as North Korea. This is probably the least surprising entry on our list, a country that's been called the Hermit Kingdom for its isolationist policies. The US and North Korea don't exactly have the coziest relationship. There's the whole Korean War thing, which never officially ended, just paused with an armistice in 1953. Decades of political tension and sanctions over North Korea's nuclear program have led to a lot of mistrust on both sides. Tourism to North Korea by Americans is basically non-existent. For the average American, North Korea is about as accessible as Mars. For now, the doors remain firmly closed, a stark reminder of the deep divisions that still exist in our world. Next up, we're heading to the Middle East, to a country with a long, complex history and a tense relationship with the United States, Iran. Unlike North Korea, Iran allows tourists. But for Americans, it's tricky. After the 1979 revolution, the US severed diplomatic ties. No US embassy in Iran makes getting a visa complicated. The US advises against traveling to Iran due to safety concerns. Some Americans get visas through other countries, but it's risky. The relationship remains fraught with tension. It's not an easy destination for American travelers. Our next stop takes us to a country ravaged by conflict, Syria. Now, it probably goes without saying that traveling to an active war zone is never a good idea. But in the case of Syria, it's not just dangerous, it's virtually impossible for Americans. The US government has issued its highest-level travel advisory for Syria: do not travel. The risks are simply too high, with widespread violence, kidnappings, and a complete breakdown of infrastructure in many areas. Plus, even if you somehow manage to convince yourself that a Syrian vacation was a good idea, it's not. Getting there would be a logistical nightmare. There are no direct flights from the US, and most airlines have suspended service to Syria altogether. Syria, once a vibrant center of culture and history, is now largely inaccessible to the outside world. Chapter 4, Cuba, a thaw in the freeze. We're heading to a country that, until recently, was completely off-limits for most Americans: Cuba. For decades, Cuba was synonymous with Cold War tensions, a communist island nation just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, yet seemingly a world away. The US imposed a trade embargo and travel restrictions, making it incredibly difficult for Americans to visit. But then, in 2014, something remarkable happened. A thaw in US-Cuba relations. Diplomatic relations were restored, and travel restrictions were eased, although not entirely lifted. Americans can travel to Cuba, but it's not as simple as booking a flight and packing your bags. There are still restrictions in place, and you'll need to qualify for one of 12 categories of authorized travel, such as family visits, educational activities, or humanitarian projects. It's a step in the right direction, but full normalization of relations and with it, completely open travel, remains elusive. Chapter 5, Turkmenistan, the land of mystery. Our next destination takes us to Central Asia, to a country shrouded in mystery and often called the North Korea of Central Asia, Turkmenistan. This isolated nation, ruled by an authoritarian government, is known for its vast deserts, opulent architecture, and, well, its extreme secrecy. Tourism is tightly controlled, and getting a visa is notoriously difficult for anyone, Americans included. Turkmenistan doesn't exactly have a user-friendly tourism website, and independent travel is virtually impossible. Most visitors who do manage to get in do so through organized tours, and even then, their movements are closely monitored. For most, Turkmenistan remains an enigma, a closed-off corner of the world that continues to intrigue and perplex in equal measure. Chapter 6, Bhutan, the high price of paradise. For our next destination, we're traveling to the Himalayas, to the Kingdom of Bhutan, a landlocked country known for its stunning natural beauty, ancient monasteries, and unique approach to happiness. Bhutan is often called the happiest country in the world, and it measures its progress not by GDP, but by gross national happiness. Bhutan has a high-value, low-impact tourism policy, which means they severely limit the number of tourists allowed in each year and charge a hefty daily tariff, around $250 per day. While Americans are not specifically banned, the high cost and logistical hurdles make Bhutan a challenging destination to visit. Sometimes the most extraordinary places require extraordinary effort to reach. Chapter 7. Saudi Arabia, Shifting Sands of Access. Our journey now takes us to the Arabian Peninsula, to Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam and home to the world's second-largest oil reserves. For years, Saudi Arabia was largely closed off to tourists, with strict visa regulations and limited access to its cultural and historical treasures. However, in recent years, Saudi Arabia has embarked on an ambitious plan to open up to tourism as part of its Vision 2030 plan to diversify its economy. They've eased visa restrictions, invested heavily in tourism infrastructure, and are actively promoting their country as a destination for history, culture, and adventure. While Saudi Arabia does now issue tourist visas to Americans, the process can be lengthy and unpredictable. It's a rapidly evolving situation, and it remains to be seen how accessible Saudi Arabia will ultimately become to American travelers. Our next destination is a somber one, Somalia, a country located in the Horn of Africa that has been ravaged by civil war, famine, and political instability for decades. Travel to Somalia is extremely dangerous, and for most nationalities, virtually impossible. The U.S. government, along with many others, strongly advises against all travel to Somalia due to the high risk of terrorism, kidnapping, and violent crime. The country lacks a functioning central government, and large areas are controlled by armed groups, including the extremist group Al-Shabaab. Even experienced journalists and aid workers face immense risks when traveling to Somalia. Until peace and security are restored, Somalia will remain largely off-limits to the outside world. Our journey now takes us to the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, to Yemen, a country embroiled in a devastating civil war that has created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Yemen has been ravaged by fighting between the Yemeni government, backed by Saudi Arabia, and Houthi rebels backed by Iran. The conflict has resulted in widespread displacement, famine, and a breakdown of essential services. Needless to say, travel to Yemen is incredibly dangerous and strongly discouraged by virtually every country in the world, including the United States. The risks of kidnapping, terrorism, and getting caught in the crossfire are simply too high. Our final destination takes us to North Africa, to Libya, a country struggling to rebuild after years of revolution and civil war. Libya has been in a state of turmoil since the 2011 uprising that ousted longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. Since then, the country has been plagued by violence, political instability, and the rise of militias vying for power. While there have been some efforts to establish a unity government, the security situation remains fragile, and travel to Libya is extremely risky. The U.S. government advises against all travel to Libya, citing the threat of terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. It's a reminder that the road to peace and stability is often long and arduous. So, there you have it. 10 destinations where Americans are, for the most part, not welcome. It's a sobering reminder that our world, for all its interconnectedness, is still fragmented by political divisions, conflict, and ideological barriers. While it's frustrating to have our travel plans curtailed by geopolitics, it's important to remember that these restrictions are often in place for a reason. But hey, the good news is that there are still over 190 other countries out there waiting to be explored. So, go pack your bags, grab your passport, and go discover the incredible diversity and beauty our planet has to offer. Just maybe double-check those travel advisories first. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.